Hi, good afternoon. My name is Catherine Freeman, and I am a consultant with the Center for Public Justice, and I will be moderating the conversation today. Families Valued is a program of the CPJ, a Christian policy and civic engagement organization. Families Valued exists to promote policies and workplace practices that honor both work and family life. During this pandemic and the near post-pandemic phase, we have been hosting a series of webinars with friends and colleagues about what family and caregiving looks like, what insights the season has given us, and what we're looking forward to once the season has ended, and where that takes our vision and practice for family supportive work policies. In our past webinars, we have reflected on some of the pandemic's effects on family, from pushing parents out of the workforce to reworking how families do life together. 20% of adults have said they have left the workforce completely because of heightened caregiving responsibilities during this time. Last month, Gabe Salguero, the president of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition, issued a challenge to Christians to develop a better theological anthropology and theology of work. As Christians, Gabe said, we need to look at and confront assumptions that productivity and self-care are mutually exclusive. We need to develop new rhythms. This month, we're excited to be hosting a webinar where we're going to be shifting from families and theologians to those who run and shape our workplaces. What visions do they have, and what practical tips do they have for developing new and more human rhythms of work, family, and rest? Deborah is going to drop a link in the in the chat with their bios, and we would love for you guys also to comment in the chat where you're calling in from today. First, we have Channing Rothwell. Channing serves as the Human Resources Director at the Village Church in Flower Mound, Texas. Her role is to help advocate, support, equip, and remove barriers for employees and supervisors to create a kingdom legacy for generations to come. She counts it as a great honor to serve alongside the staff at the Village Church. Channing and her husband have been married for 10 years and have one daughter. Channing will never turn down a bowl of ice cream. I'm with you, girl. Game night with family and friends, or jigsaw puzzles. Next, we have Cessilye Smith. Cessilye prides herself on living in the gray and working through the messiness that life has to offer. Over the years, she has witnessed the devastating impact of systemic failures in healthcare, housing, and economics have had on the human condition. Having the ability to see the overlap in these structures has given her the drive to pursue justice in a way that brings unlikely people together. Cessilye's passion for Black women and for her community has compelled her to found Abide Women's Health Services in the heart of South Dallas. Founder, executive director, racial and maternal justice activists are just a few of the many hats she wears, but the most challenging and rewarding hat she wears are as mother of her 4 children and wife to her husband, Ramon. Last but certainly not least, we have Jesse Casler. Jesse has been with Hope International since 2004. He has a BA from Eastern Nazarene College and both an MA and an MBA from Boston University. The field of microfinance falls at the intersection of these degrees, combining Jesse's heart for developing countries and his business expertise. Prior to and during his graduate work, Jesse gained experience in international banking at the State Street Corporation's international headquarters in Massachusetts, and later a subsidiary of Avent Software. He has traveled extensively throughout Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, working in finance, accounting, operations, and administration teams while at Hope. He has served as a church board member and treasurer and is deeply committed to Hope's Christian mission. Jesse and his wife, Krista, live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania with their 2 children. Well, we are going to get started. So I just wanted to let you guys know that there will be a time for question and answer at the end. So feel free to drop those questions as they're coming to you in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of your questions at the end. Okay, so my first question is for all of you. Each of you comes to this conversation with a theological vantage point. What biblical principles are at top of mind for you in shaping workplace policies and practices? Channing, if you'd like to answer first.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest things is just caring and loving well for one another, generosity, faithful stewardship, and truly living out what our mission is. And I believe every believer's mission is to love God, love people, and make disciples of Jesus Christ.
Thank you. Cecily?
There we go. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you, Channing. I strongly believe that we honor God when we care for his creation, his choice creation, which is it's us, you know? And so creating policies that center that, it points right back to honoring God.
Jesse?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here with you all and to share with you. This is a great question. I at Hope International, we really want everything we do to be rooted in the gospel. It's not just for our programmatic work, it affects everything we do, including how we care for our staff. So for our internal staff culture, we use a word passion as an acronym because we insist on turning everything into an acronym. And the N in passion for us stands for nurturing. And it's based on John 13:34, which is, I give you a new commandment that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. Now, this doesn't mean that we never push people to be better and that we never push people to do better. I think sometimes, maybe especially in the Christian environments, we can maybe lean towards, and we don't want to rock the boat or maybe get somebody upset. But I think Jesus often challenged those around him when he saw them failing to be all that God had for them. So sometimes the most caring and nurturing thing that we can do is give direct feedback and push others towards excellence. And in fact, one of my favorite management verses of all time is Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. What a wonderful verse. That has so much application in the workplace. Something I know that we at Hope have been trying to get better at. So all this flows into how we set up our policies as well. And so we expect a lot of people, but we also want to genuinely care for them and their families and be very generous on that front as well. In our staff culture, that goes well beyond our policies and procedures, but it at least starts there. We don't approach our staff as machines that we're trying to squeeze as much value out of as quickly as possible, but rather brothers and sisters in Christ, and we want them and their families to be thriving at Hope long into the future. So part of that is simple things like being known and appreciated. Part of that finds its way into policies like caring for spouses with kids at home while our staff member is traveling for work, capping the nights away from home per year for all staff members, et cetera.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Cecily, could you talk a little bit about why, as someone who's committed to racial justice, maternal activism, why family supportive work policies are important for Black women? And I think especially as we are kind of new and increasing attention has been turned towards the maternal mortality crisis.
So the Cliff Notes version of Micah 6:8 says to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. And I strongly believe that when we create policies that, let me come back to this. I'm not sure that if our audience understands what the maternal mortality crisis is. So let's touch on that.
Yes.
In this country, Black women die from pregnancy-related causes at 3 to 4 times the rate of white women. And that's just a generalized. In New York City, Black women are dying at 12 times the rate of white women from childbirth-related causes. Black babies die at 2 to 3 times the rate of white babies before they reach their first birthday. Just kind of let that sink in. Okay. And it's not, when you take into account socioeconomic factors, all of that, it still remains the same, you know? And in fact, Black educated women are dying at 5 times the rate of white uneducated women, okay? And a lot of this has to do with biases in healthcare. It's biases, it's whether that be implicit or explicit. And we can have another webinar on that, right? So just to I just wanted to paint you a picture. And so when I think of justice, when we think of the justice in the Bible, biblical justice, Jesus is justice. And so when we talk about policies that center, Black women, policies that help in the reduction of infant and maternal mortality and that address all of these disparities, at the end of the day, having family-centered policies that help Black women help all women. They help everyone, And so it is crucial. It's a devastating issue that we have going on across the nation that has to be addressed, and having policies, and I guess we'll get into the details of those policies later, but having policies that center the family and specifically Black women will in the end support us all.
Yes, thank you so much for explaining the crisis and for your comments. I think that's, I think people often don't think about paid family leave as a racial justice issue, but I think in addition to the sort of health things that you outlined, women of color are statistically more likely to be in jobs where they don't have access to paid leave. And so the work that you guys are doing is really important to changing that culture. We're going to shift and have Channing, will you tell us what led the Village Church to adopt paid family leave policies?
Yes, one of our staff values is health, and we're committed. So we say we are committed to pursuing wholeness of heart, mind, strength, and soul. So we aren't perfect at it by any means, but we want to be faithful in pursuing it. And so we knew that in order for our staff to be healthy, that their families needed to be healthy as well. And so, which meant that we needed to be able to provide generous time away to help encourage that. And with that in mind, we continually evaluate our policies to make sure that they are on par with that idea of health and care. And we also just want to be realistic, that life can be tough and overwhelming, and sometimes you just need to be able to step away. So our staff faithfully serves day in and day out, and we want to care not just for them well, but also for their families, who in many ways sacrificially give as much as our staff does. And so when I think about health, and I think about the ability to love our staff well, I believe that we continue to pursue this in our policies that we've created. And we want to make sure that we're continuing that, not just focusing on, I think part of my role is to safeguard the organization, but to also care for our employees. And so that's a fine balance, and we've got to figure out what that looks like. And so, and that means stepping in to some of the unknown. And so I'm thankful to be able to help put some guardrails around it.
Would you mind just sharing, if you can, what the policy, I feel like I should have asked you this, what your policy is, like for time off and how much people get, if you feel comfortable?
Yeah, we actually just recently, so we've had like paid time off as far as PTO goes, and it's all been kind of lumped in to everything. So sick leave and all of that. And we have a separate maternity leave and paternity leave policy. But as far as this year, we started giving sick leave as well. Like, so we separated and added additional days because we also realized that it can be really heartbreaking to have to use your vacation days for sick days. I mean, like, who wants to do that? And so we just realized that our employees, and this comes alongside of the pandemic, our employees were coming in sick because they didn't want to use their PTO, which I understand. But to care for everybody, we just decided that it would be helpful to be able to say, here's a certain amount of days that you can use towards sick leave. So we did 5 days for full time, and for part time, it's adjusted based on the hours that you work. And then we have just a generous PTO policy based on your position and the years of service that you've been with us. And then I believe it was in 2016, maybe 2017, we updated our maternity and paternity policy to be 2 weeks for bonding, and then an additional 4 weeks for recovery. And that can go for adoption. That can go for so that's how we care for both parents, father and mother. But we also know that may not be enough. And so we allow employees to take up to 12 weeks off with PTO, unpaid leave. They can use their sick leave towards it. And so a lot of times we are encouraging our employees to take the 12 weeks if you can take the 12 weeks. It is a time that you can never get back. And as a mom that has a toddler, I look back on those 12 weeks and I just think it was a gift of grace from the Lord and from a generous employer.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's helpful to just kind of, for people who are listening, to kind of get an idea of the types of policies that have been implemented. And I think it's not common for people to think about churches, but you do have staff and employees and they need time off and they need to be able to bond with their families. So I appreciate you sharing that. Jesse, we often think about the responsibilities workers have to be diligent and to be faithful and respectful to their employers. As Christians, we're trying to instill, we want to be stewards because we're ultimately working to God's glory. But we often don't talk about that, what the expectation should be for employers towards their employees, and what does it look like to care well for our employees. What do you think the responsibilities for Christian employers are to their employees? And maybe could you describe one innovation related to work and caregiving that Hope International has implemented that takes that responsibility seriously?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And maybe I'll try along the way to share our policies around leave too, just so people are aware and have another comparison point. So first of all, I think at its best, this is really a mutual thing, right? And this is something that can be mutually beneficial and reinforcing for both sides. When we care well for our employees, they in turn tend to be more productive for you as the employer. When they're engaged in their work, they tend to stay longer, so your retention is higher and they work harder. When they are working effectively, the organization tends to thrive, and so you have the resources to accomplish your mission well, including caring for your people. So I really think it can be mutually reinforcing in that way. We spend a lot of time in our hiring processes to bring on the right people and then care for them well so that they can thrive at Hope long into the future. One of our senior leaders recently said that Hope is people, and we are. We don't make widgets. We are our people. So we put a lot of energy and time into cultivating and developing the people that make up Hope International. I mentioned earlier, you talked about a couple of maybe some examples, and this goes beyond just paid leave for birth, although that's one thing I will talk about. But some examples, we have, I mentioned earlier, a cap on the nights away from home per year. We set that at 75 nights per year that you can be away from home. That's still a lot of nights, but in our industry, especially with international development, it's not unusual people to be gone 100, 200 nights a year. And of course, with COVID, we've all been well under that target. But even under normal years, most of us are well under that. And that cap includes our CEO and all the travel he needs to do, meeting with donors and other things. He still is under that 75 nights a year. So, we find it difficult to understand how we're supposed to plug into a local support network, participate in our churches, and care well for our families if we're traveling more than that every year. But we know that the work is never ending and it's always beckoning, right? So we put in safeguards like this to protect us from ourselves. Another small thing we do is we give people 2 spiritual refreshment days per year, in addition to generous vacation and holiday policies. So this communicates the importance to staff of caring for themselves spiritually as well and growing in their relationship with God. That's the source and motivation for our work. And so we can't share what we don't have. We also want to be investing in people that way, in addition to the normal prayer and devotional times that we do every week and throughout the year. On vacation time, we start with 3 weeks of paid vacation for everybody, every staff member. Once you complete 3 years of service, that moves up to 4 weeks of paid vacation. All of that's in addition to our offices closed between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day every year. So that's kind of like a 4th week of vacation at the beginning. And then as you pass 3 years, it's kind of like having 5 weeks of vacation. In addition, like Channing said, we have a separate sick time policy. So you accrue 1 day a month of sick time. That goes up to a balance of like 40 days. And that's pretty flexible. You have a spouse at home who's sick, child at home who's sick, you can use sick time to care for them. In terms of paid leave for birth or adoption, we have for adoption as well. We typically give 30 days of paid leave for primary caregivers. And that's in addition to, you can use some sick time and short-term disability policy that's employer paid to combine to make up about 12 weeks total of paid leave after a birth. So I think that's helpful. Of course, people can always take more under FMLA if they want to, that's unpaid, but as far as paid, it can be up to 12 weeks. Finally, we do a lot with flexible work arrangements. Just honestly, 12, 15 years ago, when I was just starting at Hope, we lost most of the female staff members we had when they had their first child. That was just a reality. And I think part of that was they kind of felt like, and it probably was, an all or nothing thing, right? Like if I can't be there 40 hours a week and do everything in the office, then I guess I have to opt out. And so we got better at starting to offer some part-time arrangements, some job sharing, working from home several days a week, remote working options altogether, for people outside of Lancaster, and which is where our head office is. And that's really allowed us to retain some fantastic people. And I look back, I think, my goodness, if we had lost those people that we were able to retain because of some of these policies, it would be a very different organization. So we're really thankful for that. So yeah, that's maybe my short answer. I'll let you or others ask further questions if you want to pry into
Yeah,
it.
that's great. The value of having different types of leave available to people, I think is really important. So thank you for touching on that. Cecily, how are you trying to build an equitable and family supportive policies into the culture of Abide?
Wow. Okay. So one of the things that I've learned in stepping into this position in building an organization is that I think people underestimate the power that you have when you're building something. If we want leave, if we want sick time, if we want this and that, we can do it. And you can be, you have the power to be countercultural. And so we really are fine tuning our policies now, but so I guess I'll just kind of go through like what we've done as far as PTO, paid family leave and whatnot. So all of our staff gets 3 weeks off for vacation or whatever they want to use. And it doesn't matter if you're part-time or full-time. The accrual begins the moment you're hired. We also offer 12 weeks maternity leave, paid maternity leave. We want it to be like 16 or more, but we also have to care for our organization. We've got to figure out how to do this, so we just saw the FMLA policy, 12 weeks time off, and we said, let's just pay 12 weeks. And so we created that. We also have, because we're such a very small organization, we don't have like a big like health insurance plan. So what we do is we talk to our staff. We have 4 people right now. Who needs health insurance? Not very many people need it. And so, only like one person needed it. And so what we did is we set aside funds, a certain amount for each person that can be used as sort of a flexible spending account for health. It can also be used for education. And so if we have staff who wants to cross-train and learn something that can also benefit our organization, Yes, of course it'll have to be approved, but we have right now $10,000 set aside for each employee that they can tap into and use, whether that be for healthcare or for continuing education. Another thing is we provide, the pandemic very clearly made us realize that we needed support for childcare. At the beginning of the pandemic, and even last year, we would bring our kids to work, and we still, to a certain extent, can post-pandemic. We're not doing that now. But you know, if a mother has a child, a newborn, they're coming back to work, they're still breastfeeding, they want to bring their baby to work, they can bring their baby to work. It does, as long as they're able to be productive, you know, within our environment, they can. And so because of the pandemic, no children we had to eliminate that. And so we're like, okay, how do we do this? And so we have a stipend for each employee, just a small stipend that helps with childcare. And so any person that needs childcare support can tap into that stipend. Trying to think of what else. Oh, we have unlimited sick time. And so it's the honor system. Okay, yes, we live in a fallen world and, you know, things happen. But at the end of the day, what we have to do is we have to trust people, you know, build relationship, give people a reason not to lie, you know? And when you have 3 weeks PTO, what do you got to lie about sick time for? And so if you have, we have unlimited sick time. We also have the flexibility of working from home at times. And so for an example, our office manager, who is bilingual and does most of the phone, she answers most of the calls, you know. There are times where if she needs to be home and she may not be sick, but maybe she has one sick child and she wants to work from home, she can. And our lines can be transferred to her, you know? And so we operate with a tremendous amount of flexibility. And it's really exciting to say that we really try to value people over policy, and also not operating out of fear. You know, yeah, it's expensive, it's costly, but it's worth it, and it creates a very pleasant environment. Our team is happy, and we're not only surviving, we're thriving.
That's great. I hope that for our participants, you're seeing how even for different sizes of organizations, it is possible to have family supportive policies. I think oftentimes there's this sort of misconception that you need to have, you know, this only works if you have like 100 plus or 50 plus employees. So we hope that you can see or getting some ideas of how you might advocate and support your workers, even with smaller teams. So thank you so much for sharing that, Cessilye.
Absolutely.
Channing, can you talk about some of the benefits that you've seen for the Village Church in terms of having paid leave policies? If there have been any pitfalls, and then maybe some ways that you've navigated them.
Yes. So we have been able to see a tremendous amount of growth in our staff's ability to maintain a healthy rhythm of life. Super important to us. This is always a unique balance, and we are thankful to be able to come alongside our staff and their families to help encourage that balance. When thinking about what it looks like to have healthy conversations around what it looks like to be faithful to the call the Lord has placed on your life, both vocationally and at home. Those conversations have been incredibly fruitful to allow for us to change policies, to take away policies, to create greater flexibility for our staff. As we've continued to refine our maternity and paternity policies, we have found that just as much as the maternity leave itself, the work needed to prepare both before and after the leave is just as important to the success of the leave and to the success of the family. And so we have learned from previous mistakes that it's important to have open and candid conversations early on as to avoid any misunderstandings or missed expectations. So we make sure that the employee is having a conversation with their supervisor to talk through the logistics and realities of what it will look like when they return. We suggest that they have a return check-in meeting with their supervisor already set before they go on leave, just so they know that when they come back, there will be space to have those conversations. We want to make sure that when they return, they'll be met with grace and flexibility as they find their footing, and that we will try our best to accommodate them during that time, whatever that looks like. If we can accommodate it, we want to make that happen. We've also learned from previous situations on how to be creative. So if we are able to, and it makes sense for the organization and the employee, we want to be able to modify a position if we're able to, for greater flexibility. This may mean that we make a full-time role part-time, or maybe allow them to work a certain amount of their hours during non-working out office hours. So this doesn't always work out, but we want to be open to the conversation and want to be creative about it. We also just want to provide grace. That is something that I am thankful for in my day-to-day life, and we want to be able to provide that to our employees as they step into, especially as it relates to maternity, paternity, parenthood, families, all the dynamics that come with that. And we want to be mindful that it can be a lot. And so we want to come alongside them in that.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Jesse, could you maybe give some advice for someone who wants to approach their employer about establishing a paid leave program or some other family supportive policy based on your experience at Hope?
Yeah, great question again. And, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Hope International. And so I'm on the management side of this discussion. So hopefully that's a helpful perspective to share. Maybe also, I think you were talking earlier about size of organizations. To give a quick picture for us, we have about 62 staff in our Lancaster office and about 120 around the country altogether. So just to give a size general, we're a medium-sized nonprofit. Yeah, great question. So couple of things. I think Cessilye mentioned earlier about, we'd love to give 16 weeks. We'd love to give a year. Wouldn't that be great? But, you have to worry about the organization too, right? There's another side of this. And I think that's what managers are always, the senior managers are always trying to balance these things, right? Like one person's family-friendly policy is another person's, overtime. So how do you plan well for these things and to make sure that you're, planning well for that? And so it can be easy for it to sound when employees are bringing ideas like this, like it's just, we want more, and sometimes from a management perspective, it can feel like, well, if we give 12 holidays, the team wants 15. If we have 15, they'll want 20, and so I think one thing is just to recognize some of those trade-offs that management might be facing. I think can help when you're the employees bringing an idea. Maybe try to anticipate some of those questions. Show that you understand some of those potential concerns that an employer may have in working, with a remote working situation, for example, and try to address some of those things ahead of time. I mean, even what Channing was just talking about what's the plan going to be while you're on leave, right? So, let's come and make that part of the process that you submit a plan for how the work will get covered during that time. We had one staff member who was working remotely, and he had a great perspective. He said, look, my feeling is that I need to come 100% of the way to Lancaster to make this work. And he was in Richmond, Virginia, and part of that was physically coming to Lancaster, but part of that was also a mental state, right? We've had some people go remote and they're kind of, leaning back saying like, well, when is the head office going to make sure this happens for me, or whatever, getting this information or whatever. And, I think that often you're going to have challenges with that. Whereas this employee was saying, it's my responsibility to make sure if I'm not there in the office, how do I make sure I keep up to speed with what's going on and be part of what's happening there? So I think that was helpful as well. I think if you can get impartial industry data whenever possible, that helps bring context to the decision for the manager. For us, we often go to Humentum or SHRM. Even the Accord Network is a network of Christian relief and development organizations over 100 members, can be a great place to get some context to bring to that. So are we the only ones doing this, or are there lots of people doing this, right? I think can be helpful for management. Help them not to see just the cost. It's easy to see the cost part of this, but to see the benefit of something like this too. Maybe you can talk about retention rate. If you could even compare your retention rate to others, wow, that would be great. I talked to Channing's church, and their retention rate is 85%. Ours is 50. Boy, that would save us a lot of money if we had a better retention rate. You could point to exit surveys from your own departing staff, maybe if they're bringing up this as a topic. We do the Best Christian Workplace survey. Maybe you do something similar. If there's feedback from that you can be responding to out of this, I think that's, again, helpful for management to hear that. So, I think bottom line, work collectively with them. Maybe there's a tendency sometimes to maybe management can feel blindsided by this, and then it gets defensive really quickly, right? And so I think trying to make that a collaborative process wherever possible, maybe even at the very beginning, even asking, are you even open to a discussion about this before we do a bunch of research and spend a bunch of time on that, I think could be helpful. So yeah, and if you're not, feel like you're not senior enough in your organization to feel comfortable, maybe even asking those kind of questions, work with your manager, work with HR. That should be part of their role, is to help you navigate something like that. And I would try to make sure that final product is a one-page proposal with a recommendation. Then you put the rest of that research in appendix if you want. And so part of this is just how do you get anything through to management, right? Succinct is helpful. Sometimes we think like the longer it is, the more convincing it is. Nah, the longer it is, the less people will read it. Try to shrink it down and summarize it in a way that is really easy for senior management to consume.
That's great. That was a lot of really great advice. Yeah, we, in a different conversation with Families Valued, we had a woman who basically, it had never occurred to the people in her organization that they need paid family leave because almost all of her other coworkers were men, and their assumption was like, well, once you get, and we talked about this in the last one with like in our theological, is like, I think sometimes for Christians, they think the idea that like, well, you're a woman, you're going to have kids, and then you're going to leave the workforce, so it doesn't really matter. And they basically created a family leave policy for this one employee because she was so valuable. They were like, you have to come back. And subsequently, the gender breakdown of their organization has completely changed. And I think some of it was just her helping them see that this assumption that, that women, to Cecilie's point, women's flourishing is the flourishing of everybody, that it's not just about one particular group. And so those tips are really helpful and how you help management come alongside these conversations. So the last question before we open it up to the participants is, for all of you, thinking broadly, what mindset and heart shifts would you like to see in how we all work and how employers structure work over the next 5 years? Cecilie, I'll let you get us started.
So we have this saying, it's the 3 words, the 3 R's, and we're utilizing this for our capital campaign. And it's rest, resist, restore. Rest, resist, restore. I believe this pandemic has helped us to understand that what we were doing pre-pandemic was not healthy. Like, it wasn't healthy at all. And so when I think of rest, I think of, okay, slowing down, slowing down, finding what it is, whether that's taking a nap or finding something that brings you rest and healing in your body. When I think of resistance is resisting grind culture. We live in a capitalistic society, and work is what we do. Well, it's not healthy. It is to the detriment of our families. And so I urge people to resist, get creative, and the last one is restore. When restoration comes when rest and resistance is combined. That's what happens, is you begin to see a restored body, spirit, mind, physical, like all of it restored. You see restored families, you see restored communities, you start seeing the fruit of slowing down. I didn't mention this before, but we 32 hours is our full time. We are on a 32-hour work week, and we are just, if not more, productive when we work that way. And so I really hope that people would envision, get creative, and know that there is a better way. There is.
Channing?
Yeah, I love that. 32-hour work week. That's actually one of the things that I listed out is the idea of a 40-hour work week. I think that it may be a thing of the past. I hope that it's starting to be, because at the end of the day, it really matters what you're getting done. And so it may look different for every person. And we need to be accommodating to that. I think that those are the conversations we're starting to have here. Of what does it look like to just get your job done, and to be faithful in doing it. And we don't know what that, I mean, I don't have that answer. But I do know that that is something that we continue to, I mean, even during COVID and all of that, it was, when you are with your family, be with your family. I mean, we were home so often that people were not shutting down. They were still working. And that's not helpful for anybody. And so I think the idea of a 40-hour work week is starting to go away. I also think that working from home is here to stay. And I love that. We just, we had a team work on some office ideas. And one of those ideas was, hey, we're only going to require 2 days a week for people to be in the office. That doesn't include Sunday services. Obviously, you have to be in person for Sunday services, but and then all the rest of the time, it's up to the team to decide that and where. And so I know everybody said how many staff, we are at around 80 staff, most of those being full-time. We actually just intentionally shrunk over the last couple of years. We had 4 campuses roll off to become their own autonomous churches. And our last campus will roll off this July. And so we'll be one campus. And so what does that look like? We have the opportunity to dream and to figure out what an office looks like, as well as collaborating. What does collaborating look like? What does innovation look like? When you don't have this strict office policy of you have to be in the office, and trusting our employees. Like, just at the end of the day, we trust our employees. That's why they're our employees. And so we want to be able to provide flexibility in that way as well, while still getting the work done.
That's great. Jesse, last but not least.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I was thinking of a story in relation to this question. So I was at a gathering of business leaders, not just nonprofit, some nonprofit, mostly for-profit actually. This was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And because it was business leaders, business owners, it was mostly older white men because it's our country. But it was interesting. One of the speakers asked a question about how do you know who your best employees are, or your hardest working employees? And one of the guys raised his hand and said, it's really easy. You just go into the parking lot at 5 o'clock and you see whose cars are still there. I thought, wow, that's such an interesting answer. I mean, probably a little bit of generational answer there. But there was this assumption that if you're in the office, you're working, which I just don't think is true. I mean, you can be in the office and streaming March Madness on the internet of the office, right? So that's not necessarily, and just because you're not in the office doesn't mean you're working, especially increasingly in our context, right? With mobile phones and all that kind of thing. If anything, like Channing and Cessilye have been talking about it, we have to guard ourselves against working too much. I rarely, if ever, have to tell my staff, I need you to work harder. It's almost always like, you need to take a break. This is too much. That grind culture that Cessilye talked about. So I think, but there's also a sense of, if they're in the office, I know they're working. That's the sense, right? And so I think one of the mindsets we need to change is we need to get better at managing goals and expectations for staff, and to make that really clear for people, so that one, we can be confident of the value that staff are providing to the organization, and the staff member feels confident in that too. And two, that unlocks the location and time of work thing, right? So I have one employee who said, look, I've got to pick up my kids at school at 3:15 every day. I'm out from 3 to 5 every day. Now, I'll be back on at 9 o'clock in the night after the kids are in bed, and I'm going to work really hard during that time to make up the work that I need to do. No problem. That's fine. And I'm not even clocking her in and out. I just trust her to get the work done. And we're clear on what the expectations are for getting the work done. And so it works great that way. I think increasingly in our environment, we need to just 8 to 5 is lazy way of making sure people are working. And just like we said, just because they are in the office during that time doesn't mean they're really getting their stuff done. Maybe they're really slow at getting stuff done. That's why they're there after 5 o'clock. And so I think that's something we need to get better at, is just managing goals better, managing expectations way more than once a year at an annual review. We use a tool called 15-5 that helps us every week. We're setting goals for the next week. What's going to happen? How do we support you better as your manager, et cetera. So I think we need to get better at that. And in addition, I think it's important to invest in employees for the long term and really bring the right people on the team. And then, just as both Channing and Cessilye have said, to trust them, right? I think sometimes we try to over-engineer controlling our employees to make sure we're getting what we want to get out of them. And there's this really feeling of like sometimes the tighter you try to hold on to something, the less you'll get it. And so I think there's an element of trust that needs to happen there to say, if you're asking the question, boy, if that person's not here, I'm really not sure that they're working and they're doing the stuff they need to do. Maybe you don't have the right person on the team to begin with, right? If you're that concerned about that. So yeah, that'd be the answer I would give to that question.
Well, thank you guys so much to our panelists for giving their time so generously and giving and sharing their wisdom with us. So we're going to open the floor to questions. If you would drop your questions in the chat, and then just to give you some guidelines or framework, what questions you have for the panelists around cultivating family supportive workplace, and have you helped your workplace cultivate more family supportive policies? And if you have, we'd love to hear how you've gone about that. And if we don't have any questions, we at Families Values do have one ask for our attendees. Congress is poised to consider a new proposal from President Biden around family supportive work policies. It's called the American Families Plan. We are trying to collect signatures. We're going to deliver a letter to Congress to add a Christian or faithful voice of why family supportive policies are important to people of faith. So if you would be willing, please sign the letter, maybe send it around to your organization or others that you know that might be interested in family supportive policies. If there are no questions, I will pray and let you get back to your Thursday. Last call for questions. Okay, well, this panel is going to be recorded, so feel free. We will send out the link to the recorded video. So maybe your way of asking your employer for paid family leave is just to send them a link to this webinar. We are happy to help in any way that we can. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And I'll pray and then we'll be finished. Dear Heavenly Father, I just come to you now, God, and I just thank you so much for the ways in which you have created us, how you have taught us healthy rhythms of work and rest and Sabbath, God. Father, that we may be people who care about the flourishing of all people, that we would seek peace and pursue it, that we would do justice in our lives, and how we care for our employees and how we care for our employers, God, and one another, God. Father, you would remind us that we are your people and your creation, God, and that you have a design and a plan for us, and it is not to work ourselves to death. Father, I just thank you for everyone on this call today and how they are working towards that vision of human flourishing. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.